Hello everyone, my name is Yannick Pelletier and I'm a Swiss Grandmaster. In this video we are going to discuss the unbelievable result of Vincent Keymer at the Grenke Open in Karlsruhe. Vincent Keymer is an international master of 13 years old and he won that very strong Open with 8 points out of 9 and a rating performance over or around 2800. This is incredible for a player of such a young age, and this Open was extremely strong with around 800 participants, dozens of grandmasters, some of them rated above 2700s, and Vincent Keymer in this Open made 2 draws, only 7 victories, a draw against Ukrainian Grandmaster Korobov, rated 2660 something. In the last round of the event he beat Richard Rapport, himself a former prodigy, and well, nevertheless I decided to take a look at the following game played in round 6. Vincent Keymer leads the white pieces and he faces Italian GM Valsecchi, who is rated 2510, also quite a young player too, because I think this game is even more impressive than his win against 27 plus player Richard Rapport. That game was also quite interesting when Rapport sacrificed a piece for an attack, and in the end it didn't really work out. But still, I really liked the following game won by Keymer, because the style is even more impressive for such a young player. Well, let's go. He's white and plays knight f3, c5, c4, knight f6, d4, e6, inviting the Benoni if white plays d5. But Keymer went on knight c3, and after c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight c6. We have a very well-known position of the English opening, and g3, queen b6 is actually the main line here. Well, normally white chooses between the main move knight db5, which can lead to hair-raising complications, or the more quiet knight b3, when after bishop b4, for instance, black usually does really well there. But for this game, Keymer has played knight f3, and I'm actually wondering, is this the fruit of preparation or an inspiration over the board? Well, the thing is, Vincent Keymer has already, even though he's pretty young, he's already had a few strong trainers, and his current main trainer is Peter Leko, none other than Peter Leko, the former challenger to the World Championship crown when he faced Vladimir Kramnik in the final of the World Championship in 2004. A great player himself, extremely well prepared, experienced, with an unbelievable comprehension and understanding of the game. So having Leko as a trainer is absolutely incredible, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how the combination of the talent of Keymer together with the experience of Peter Leko is going to develop in the future. And well, so the question is knight f3 actually the fruit of preparation? It's not impossible, because he played really well in the next few moves. Well, here black has a choice. He can play as in the game, or he can go for d5, changing the pawn structure after c takes d5, e takes d5. Now it's pretty dangerous now for white to take on d5, because black is going to get full compensation and very active piece play for the pawn. So bishop g2 is wiser, but it allows d4, knight a4, queen a5, check. Bishop d2, queen b5 was actually played in another game. Bishop e6, and the position is pretty unclear with this pawn on d4. Black seems to be pretty active, but there is this slight weakness here on d4 to keep in mind. Well, bishop b4 has been played by Valsecchi. Bishop g2, knight e4, castle, and that's a pawn sacrifice by white. Well, he's more or less forced to do it. because f2 was attacked as well. So knight takes c3 happened, b takes c3, and black refrained from taking the pawn, and probably rightly so, because bishop takes c3 leads to dangerous consequences. Excuse me. Bishop e3, queen c7, rook b1. He could go to c1 as well, but rook b1 is pretty good, putting the rook on the open file. Castle c5, and well, here for the first time, but we're gonna see it again in the course of the game. We'll see that basically the whole evaluation of the position turns around the control of this square on d6, and whether black is able to push that pawn and kind of free his position. If that's the case, black is gonna do well. Otherwise, white is gonna keep pressure. And here, if black tries to prepare d6 by rook d8, white plays queen c2, bishop f6, and knight g5. Pretty strong, threatening to take on h7 with almost mating consequences. So takes f6 and just bishop e3 back. And black can play d6 if he wants now, but with the king slightly weakened and white's bishops are very strong, high on the queen side, it's not yet easy to develop the bishop from c8 for black here. So white keeps good compensation here. Bishop e7 was played in the game, though. Black thinks that he doesn't want to weaken his black squares here, especially d6. Instead of that, he wants to leave white with the pawn weaknesses, the pawns on c4 and c3. Bishop e3. And possibly queen a6 would have been more to the point here, since after c5 he can play b6 under favorable conditions or circumstances, and black's position should be more or less okay here. Instead he played queen c7, c5 came anyway, and well, just to show the difference, if he plays b6 now, there is bishop f4 first, sorry, hitting the queen, goes to d8, and knight d4 now. And after bishop b7, knight b5 is pretty annoying. You can see those two juicy squares, c7 and d6, pretty well controlled by white. Castle, bishop c7, queen c8, and bishop d6. This is assessed as slightly better for white by the computer, and I tend to agree actually. White still has pressure here. It's not easy for black to disentangle his position. So Valsecchi castled, which seems to be normal, and white could have played queen d3 and followed by rook fd1, for instance, perhaps bishop f4 at some point. And again, everything turns around this square here, and ability for black to push that pawn eventually to d6 and free his position. Instead of that, Keymer took a very mature decision, in fact, knight d4. On the one hand, white wishes to go to b5, again with d6 inside here, and actually black decided not to allow this by taking on d4, but this allows c takes d4, and suddenly, like by magic, white has improved his pawn structure again, and he's ready to play bishop f4. So black basically doesn't really have a choice. He has to try and play d5, which also tries to block the long diagonal of that bishop and g2. What Keymer took here, d6 en passant, bishop takes d6, queen b3. And that's also a good move, keeping pressure against the pawn b7, which explains black's next move, rook b8. He wants to play b6 and bishop b7. So here rook ac1, queen e7, and rook fd1. And this is nice. You see, all white's pieces are developed, and they actually play an important part in the whole position. Both rooks are well placed. The bishop on the long diagonal, of course, but that one on e3 also has potential. So everything is well placed, and the same cannot be said yet about black's pieces, because there's still this problem, the bishop on c8, and I think that black should have tried and solved it with bishop d7, perhaps, and then rook fc8, perhaps b6 first, something like this. White is better, but it's not yet completely easy to prove something more than a small advantage for him. Instead of that, the Italian grandmaster played b5, trying to solve his problems by playing actively, but by doing so he also weakens a few squares, and I think that he overlooked an important resource for white. Actually, Keymer could have played d5 immediately. This would have been pretty strong as well, but he decided to play bishop c6, which is good too, a6, rook c2, bishop b7, and maybe Keymer here intended to play just rook dc1. Would have been a decent continuation, keeping an edge, of course, but maybe here he spotted this move d5 and played it eventually, and turns out to be pretty strong because white favorably opens up the center, and we will see after pawn takes d5, rook takes d5, how all white pieces coordinate perfectly. This is actually what we call in chess harmony. All pieces are protected, the bishop is protected, protects the rook, the queen protects more or less everything, it is protected itself, the bishop on e3 as well, everything coordinates, everything is well protected, but also displays activity, puts pressure on black's position. To have a feeling for harmony in chess is not something easy, and especially it's difficult when you're so young, basically lacking experience. Normally when we speak about talent of a wunderkind, of a really young player, we usually contemplate his tactical abilities, attacking skills and so on. But here Keymer shows great understanding of the position, a maturity which is extremely rare. Black played bishop c8, which can seem to be strange at first sight, but I quite like this attempt to defend the position, to try to reorganize the defense, because the bishop wants to go to e6 to occupy this square. There was a pawn there before, so this was no question before. Now the bishop will find a pretty strong square here on e6, and actually Keymer does a great job preventing black's freeing ideas. He plays queen d3, hitting the bishop. On d6, bishop b4, and now bishop g5. That's another move I quite like. Well, black's choice is not easy. If he plays f6, bishop f4 is coming, and on the one hand he has slightly weakened his position here. The castle has been slightly opened. And of course, the rook is hit on f4, by the bishop f4 on b8. But queen e6 played in the game is not ideal either, because, well, keep in mind, of course, that the bishop wants to go to this square, so certainly not very good. So rook d4 would have been pretty strong here, but Keymer played queen d4, which is decent as well. Bishop e7. And that's again a witty retort by black, because the obvious rook e5, which seemingly wins a piece, is faced with bishop f6. And you can see that there is a pin here, so kind of strangely enough, white isn't winning material here. The young German played bishop f4, and here I think came the well, the last mistake, perhaps, maybe not the last mistake, because we'll see that white also played slightly inaccurately later on. But bishop b7, a strange resource, it's actually strange that this works, would have been actually preferable here, even though white keeps quite a clear advantage. But, well, after queen g6, white simply retreated to c1 with the rook, and his advantage is actually huge here. Bishop e6, bishop takes b8, bishop takes d5, bishop takes d5, rook takes b8, and two pieces have been exchanged on each side, and the smoke has cleared, and can actually take stock here. See that we have opposite colored bishops on the board, but white has queen and rook, which are much more active than the black queen and rooks. So this actually is the main factor to evaluate the position. And after queen a7, both the rook and the bishop of Valsecchi are attacked. Queen d6, rook c6. Tactics in chess is always very important. When queen d8 fails to rook c7, and f7 is kind of dropping eventually. So he went queen e5, and there is f4, and it's clear that now there is a short circuit with the black forces here. He can't protect everything. Even if he gives a check on a1, he won't be able to protect everything, so he decided to give up the exchange. Queen takes d5, rook queen takes b8, bishop f8, and here there would have been perhaps the only moment in the game where Keymer didn't play the best move actually. This would have been rook c8, straightforward variation, small calculation needed, but not too complicated. Maybe he was slightly in time trouble. Queen d1, check, king f2, queen d4, king f3, some checks, but after king e3, soon we'll see that checks run out. Queen e6, king f2, no more check. He needs to play something like queen e7, but he's gonna lose very quickly anyway. Instead of this queen b6 and this slight hesitation gave black perhaps a little chance. He could have tried queen d1 check. He should have tried it. King f2 and queen h1. When there is nothing better for white to retreat than to retreat the rook to c3, takes on h2 check and king f1. Well, checks will also run out, but black has taken a pawn and slightly weakened white's king. So white keeps the advantage, obviously, but it's still a bit complicated, perhaps. Instead, he took on a2, queen e3, a5, and rook c8. Well, he hasn't forgotten that the 8th rank is still vulnerable for black, with the spin on the bishop on f8. Queen b1 check, king g2, queen b4, queen d3, and here, well, a4 seems to be logical, but queen d5 is unpleasant, and the queen displays an unbelievable energy here, not just stopping the black pawn, but also hitting f7. Basically, there is this threat here, rook c7, and black is more or less hopeless here. Queen e7, queen takes b5. Well, maybe he was hoping to give some more checks, but again, it will soon run out here. a4, queen c4, and that's the main problem. Black cannot afford exchanging queens, so white will always be able to kind of blackmail his opponent by offering the exchange of queens. Queen d1 check, king g2, a3, here again queen d3, while queen a4 hastens the end. Queen d6. What if he gives a check on e4? There's king f2, normal check, and black loses the bishop on f8, and mate follows very soon. I really liked this performance by Keymer in that game, because it was very atypical for such a young player to display such understanding of the game and positional feeling. Really, I think we can look forward to seeing Keymer's progression, which is certainly going to be quite important and quick, especially also looking forward to seeing how Keymer will improve this year, because by winning this Open in Karlsruhe, he actually qualified to the next year's closed tournament, which runs alongside the Open, or actually almost alongside, because it's not over this year. But just to tell you, give you an idea, this year Carlsen participates, Caruana, Vachier-Lagrave, Anand. So I'm really looking forward to Keymer facing the top players in the world next year. He's going to be 14 and something, and it's going to be quite an experience. So we can only wish him good luck, and well, hopefully you enjoyed this video, the explanations of this game, and well, if that is the case, I really appreciate if you like the video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much, and see you in another video.